The rope hung from the barn rafter when Owen Keller found it, swaying slightly in the New Mexico wind, and he knew then that he had reached the absolute bottom of his despair. It was March of 1878, and the winter had been merciless to the small ranchers around Abiquiu. Owen stood in that barn for what felt like hours, staring at that rope, thinking about his father who had built this place with his own 2 hands, about his mother who had died giving birth to him 28 years ago, about his father who had followed her to the grave just 6 months past. The banknote was due in 3 weeks. Without it paid, everything his family had worked for would belong to Charles Merchant, the banker who seemed to take particular pleasure in watching small operations crumble. Owen was not a man given to defeat, but he was also not a fool. The cattle he had left after the harsh winter would not fetch enough at market. The fields lay fallow because he could not afford seed and workers both. His hands were calloused and strong, his back straight, his will determined, but determination did not pay debts. He left the barn without touching that rope, but the image followed him into the house where dust gathered on his mother's things, where his father's chair sat empty by the cold fireplace. He made coffee and sat at the scarred kitchen table, trying to think of any solution he had not already considered. He had tried to get work in town, but every spare moment away from the ranch meant less care for the animals, less repair on the fences, less chance of salvaging anything at all. The knock on his door came near sunset, unexpected and sharp. Owen opened it to find Reverend Thomas standing on his porch, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable in the way men of God often do when they come bearing proposals rather than prayers. "Owen," the Reverend said, "might I come in?" They sat at that same kitchen table, and the Reverend got straight to the matter. There was a woman, he explained, a widow named Ruth Calloway who had come to Abiquiu 2 months ago from Kansas. Her husband had died, and she had traveled west hoping for a new start, but the frontier was no place for a woman alone. She had been staying in a small room behind the general store, doing mending and washing to earn her keep, but she needed security, stability, a home. "What I am suggesting," Reverend Thomas said carefully, "is a practical arrangement. Ruth needs a home and protection. You need help with the ranch. And there is another matter. I understand the bank holds a note on this property." Owen's jaw tightened. Everyone in town knew his business, it seemed. Ruth's husband left her with some money, not a fortune, but enough. She mentioned to me that she would be willing to invest in a stable situation, a future. If you were to marry her, that money could save your ranch. The word marry hung in the air like smoke. Owen had courted a girl once, 3 years back, but she had chosen a merchant's son from Santa Fe, someone who could offer her a life without dirt under his fingernails. Since then, Owen had convinced himself that marriage was not for him, that he was meant to work this land alone. "I do not know her," Owen said. "Many marriages begin with less than knowing," the Reverend replied. "I have spoken with her. She understands the arrangement would be primarily practical. She asks only for respect and a home. She is a good woman, Owen, 24 years old, hardworking, respectable. She has had tragedy in her life, but she is strong." Owen thought again of that rope in the barn. He thought of his father's grave on the hill overlooking the ranch, thought of the promise he had made to keep this land in the family. "When would this happen?" he asked. "As soon as you agree to meet her. If you find the arrangement suitable to you both, the marriage could take place within the week. It would give you time to settle the bank note." Owen rubbed his face with both hands, feeling the rough stubble, feeling the weight of impossible choices. Marriage to a stranger to save his land seemed like something from a desperate tale, yet here he was, living that very desperation. "All right," he said. "I will meet her." The next day, Owen put on his best shirt, the one his father had worn to church, and rode into town. The general store stood on the main street, its wooden sign creaking in the wind. Inside, Mrs. Henderson, the store owner's wife, greeted him with knowing eyes and directed him to the back. Ruth Calloway sat in a simple wooden chair near the window, sewing. When she looked up at his approach, Owen was struck first by her stillness. She did not rush to stand or simper or perform any of the theatrics he had half expected. She simply set down her sewing, folded her hands in her lap, and waited. She was pretty in an understated way. Dark brown hair pulled back in a simple bun, gray eyes that held something he could not quite name, a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. She wore a plain black dress, still in mourning, he supposed. "Miss Calloway," he said, then corrected himself. "Mrs. Calloway." "Mr. Keller." Her voice was soft but clear. Mrs. Henderson had conveniently disappeared, leaving them alone. Owen stood awkwardly for a moment before taking the chair across from her. "I suppose the Reverend explained the situation," he began. "He did. And you are comfortable with such an arrangement?" Ruth looked at him directly then, and he saw something in those gray eyes that might have been recognition. Not of him specifically, but of desperation, of having no good choices, only necessary ones. "I am comfortable with honesty," she said. "You need help with your ranch and money to pay your debts. I need a home and security. Marriage will provide both. I do not expect love or romance. I expect respect and honesty. Can you provide that?" Her directness surprised him. Most women he knew spoke in circles, hinting and suggesting. Ruth spoke like someone who had learned that time was too precious to waste on games. "I can," he said. "Then we have an arrangement. I have $500 from my husband's life insurance. The Reverend says your bank note is $400. That leaves something to start with for seed and supplies." Owen felt something twist in his chest. Shame, perhaps, that he was taking money from a widow. Pride rebelling against needing rescue, but also relief, profound and overwhelming. "I will work hard to make the ranch profitable again," he said. "You would not be investing in a failing operation. I am a good rancher. The winter was harsh, but I know this land. I can make it work." "I believe you," Ruth said simply. They sat in silence for a moment. Owen tried to think of what else should be said, what words were supposed to accompany an arrangement like this. "The Reverend said you came from Kansas," he ventured. "Yes, my husband was a farmer. He died last November, pneumonia." She stated it flatly, without emotion. "We had only been married a year. I am sorry. Are you?" The question was not challenging, merely curious. Owen considered it. "Yes, death is a hard thing. I lost my father 6 months ago, my mother when I was born. I know something about loss." Ruth nodded slowly. "Then we understand each other in that, at least." They agreed to marry in 3 days. The banns would be rushed, the ceremony small. Ruth would bring her few possessions to the ranch, and Owen would go to the bank immediately after to pay the note. Over the next 3 days, Owen worked frantically to make the house presentable. He cleaned with a desperation he had not felt even when his father had taken sick, scrubbing floors and washing windows, and airing out rooms that had been closed for months. He moved his things into his father's old room and prepared his own bedroom for Ruth, understanding without being told that she would expect separate quarters. This was a business arrangement, after all. He killed a chicken and made a poor attempt at roasting it, then decided that was foolish and ate beans instead. He fixed the broken step on the porch and repaired the hinge on the front door that had been squeaking for a year. He stood in the house that evening, looking at the results of his efforts, and felt the strangeness of what he was about to do settle over him like a heavy coat. The wedding took place on a Thursday morning in the small adobe church at the center of Abiquiu. Ruth wore the same black dress. Owen wore his father's suit, which was slightly too big in the shoulders. Reverend Thomas performed the ceremony with Mrs. Henderson and her husband as witnesses. The words were traditional, the vows spoken quietly. When Owen slipped the simple gold band onto Ruth's finger, her hand was steady but cold. They signed the register. Owen's hand shook slightly as he wrote his name. Ruth's signature was neat and precise. Afterward, they went directly to the bank. Charles Merchant sat behind his massive oak desk like a toad on a rock, watching with obvious disappointment as Owen counted out $400 in crisp bills. Ruth stood beside him, silent and straight-backed. "I confess I am surprised," Merchant said, his thick fingers drumming on the desk. "I had already begun making plans for the property." "Then I am sorry to disappoint you," Owen said. "Not sorry at all." Merchant made a show of counting the money slowly, then produced the note and marked it paid. "I suppose congratulations are in order. I heard about your hasty marriage." Owen felt Ruth stiffen beside him, but when he glanced at her, her face revealed nothing. They left the bank and walked to where Owen had tied his horse and the wagon he had brought for Ruth's belongings. The town watched them with varying degrees of curiosity and judgment. Owen helped Ruth onto the wagon seat, and they rode out of Abiquiu toward the ranch without speaking. The land stretched out around them, brown and vast, dotted with juniper and pinon. The Jemez Mountains rose in the distance, still capped with snow. The sky was that particular shade of blue that only seemed to exist in New Mexico, endless and clear. "It is beautiful," Ruth said suddenly, the first words she had spoken since the ceremony. Owen looked at the land as if seeing it through her eyes. "It can be harsh too, especially in winter." "But yes, it is beautiful." Kansas was flat. You could see forever, but there was nothing to see. This has character. They arrived at the ranch near midday. Owen helped Ruth down from the wagon and carried her single trunk into the house. She stood in the main room, looking around at the simple furniture, the stone fireplace, the kitchen area with its iron stove. "I will show you to your room," Owen said. He led her down the short hallway to the bedroom he had prepared. Ruth stepped inside, set her small bag on the bed, and looked around. The room was spare but clean, with a window overlooking the eastern fields. "Thank you," she said. Owen nodded and retreated, unsure what else to do. He went outside and threw himself into work, checking on the cattle, mending a section of fence that had sagged over winter, mucking out stalls. He worked until his muscles ached and his mind quieted. When he came in at sunset, he found Ruth had been busy as well. The kitchen was cleaner than it had been in months. Something was cooking on the stove that smelled better than anything Owen had managed in half a year. The floor had been swept. The windows were open to the evening air, and his father's chair had been dusted. Ruth stood at the stove, stirring a pot. She had changed from the black dress into a simple gray one, her hair still pulled back in that same neat bun. "I found vegetables in the root cellar and some salt pork," she said without turning around. "I hope that is all right." "You did not have to," Owen said. "We had an arrangement. I would help with the ranch. Cooking is part of that." They ate at the kitchen table in near silence. The food was simple but good, and Owen ate more than he had at one sitting in weeks. Ruth picked at her own portion, eating little. "Is it not to your liking?" Owen asked, gesturing at her barely touched plate. "I am not very hungry. I have not been since." She trailed off. Since her husband died, Owen understood. Grief could steal appetite as easily as it stole sleep. After dinner, Owen washed the dishes while Ruth put away the remaining food. They moved around each other carefully, like two people learning a new dance, trying not to step on each other's toes. As darkness settled over the ranch, Owen lit the lamps. Ruth sat in a chair near the fireplace, her hands folded in her lap, staring at nothing. "I usually read for a bit before bed," Owen said, feeling the need to fill the silence. "There are some books here if you would like." "I do not feel like reading tonight, but thank you." Owen picked up a book, one of his father's favorites about cattle ranching, but he could not focus on the words. He was too aware of Ruth's presence, of the strangeness of having another person in the house, of the fact that this woman was now his wife in name, if nothing else. The clock on the mantel ticked toward 9. Ruth stood suddenly. "I will retire now," she said. "Good night." "Good night," Owen replied. She disappeared down the hallway. Owen heard the soft click of her door closing. He sat for a while longer, staring into the empty fireplace, trying to process the fact that his life had changed so completely in just a few days. He eventually made his way to his father's room, to the bed that still smelled faintly of sickness, despite the fresh linens. He lay in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the house settling, and wondered what Ruth was doing in her own room, if she was sleeping or lying awake as he was, thinking about the choices that had brought them both to this strange place. Sleep, when it came, was restless and full of dreams he could not remember upon waking. The next days fell into a rhythm. Owen worked the ranch from dawn until dusk, and Ruth kept the house. She cooked, cleaned, mended his clothes, tended a small garden she started near the house. They spoke little, only what was necessary. "Good morning. The fence in the north pasture needs repair. I am going into town for supplies. What do we need?" Ruth was true to her word about being hardworking. Owen would come in from the fields to find bread baking, floors scrubbed, clothes washed and hanging on the line. The house began to feel lived in again, the air of neglect and grief slowly lifting. But Ruth herself remained closed off, distant. She went through the motions of daily life with quiet efficiency, but there was no joy in it, no spark. She rarely smiled. She never laughed. When Owen tried to make conversation beyond the practical, her answers were brief, polite, and final. At night, they retreated to their separate rooms. The hallway between them might as well have been a mile. 2 weeks into the marriage, Owen woke in the middle of the night to a sound that made his blood run cold. It took him a moment to identify it. Crying. Quiet, muffled, but unmistakable. He lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to Ruth weep. Every instinct told him to go to her, to offer comfort, but what right did he have? They were strangers who had made a business arrangement. Her grief was her own. Still, he found himself getting out of bed, pulling on his trousers, padding quietly down the hall. He stood outside her door, hand raised to knock, then let it fall. What would he say? What comfort could he offer? He went back to his room and lay awake until dawn, listening to her cry herself to sleep. The next morning, Ruth appeared for breakfast with red-rimmed eyes but said nothing. Owen said nothing. They ate in silence and went about their day. Spring was coming to the high desert. The days grew longer and warmer. With the money that remained after paying the bank, Owen bought seed and hired 2 men from town to help work the fields. The ranch slowly came back to life. He bought more cattle, young stock he could raise up. The future that had seemed so impossible just a month ago now appeared possible, if not quite bright. But as the ranch improved, Ruth seemed to fade. She grew quieter, thinner. She moved through the house like a ghost, there but not really there. Owen watched her with growing concern but did not know how to reach across the distance between them. One evening in early April, Owen came in from working the fields to find Ruth standing at the kitchen window, staring out at the sunset. She did not seem to hear him enter. "Ruth," he said softly. She, startled, turned to face him. "I did not hear you come in. I will start dinner." "Wait," Owen said. "Just wait a moment." She paused, looking at him with those gray eyes that held so much and revealed so little. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I am fine." "You are not fine. You have not been fine since you arrived." Ruth's jaw tightened. "I am doing what we agreed upon. I keep the house. I help where I can. If my work is not satisfactory, your work is not the issue," Owen interrupted. "Ruth, you barely eat. You barely speak. I hear you crying at night." Color rose in her pale cheeks. "That is my own concern. You are my wife, in name only. You said you wanted honesty. Here is honesty. I am a business arrangement. My feelings are not part of our contract." The word stung more than Owen wanted to admit. "You are not a business arrangement. You are a person who is suffering. And what would you have me do?" Ruth's voice rose, emotion finally breaking through. "Smile and pretend that my life has not been torn apart. Pretend that I did not bury my husband 6 months ago. Pretend that I did not have to sell myself into a loveless marriage just to survive." The words hung in the air between them, harsh and true. "I did not think of it that way," Owen said quietly. Ruth seemed to deflate, the burst of anger leaving her as quickly as it had come. "I apologize. That was unkind. You have been nothing but decent to me. This arrangement has been fair. The fault is mine. I thought I could do this, but I do not know if I can." "Do what? Be married? Be alive?" Ruth said, so softly Owen almost did not hear. He understood then, really understood, the depth of her grief. It was not just sadness. It was the same darkness he had felt in the barn, staring at that rope. It was the kind of despair that made breathing feel like too much effort, that made each day feel like a mountain too steep to climb. "I know something about that feeling," Owen said. "Before the Reverend came to me with this proposal, I was in a dark place. I was ready to give up." Ruth looked at him, really looked at him for perhaps the first time since they had met. "What stopped you?" she asked. "Honestly, I do not know. Fear, maybe, stubbornness. My father taught me that Kellers do not quit. Even when we should, we do not." He took a step closer. "Ruth, I know this is not the marriage either of us wanted, but we are here. We are alive. Maybe that is enough to start with." "I do not know how to start," Ruth said, and her voice broke. Owen did something he had not done since they married. He crossed the space between them and pulled her into an embrace. She stiffened at first, then collapsed against him, her face pressed against his chest, and finally, fully, let herself cry. He held her while she sobbed, great wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. He held her while years of grief and fear and loneliness poured out. He held her until she had nothing left, until she sagged against him, exhausted. "I am sorry," she whispered. "You have nothing to be sorry for." They stood there in the fading light, holding each other, two broken people trying to figure out how to be whole. Eventually, Ruth pulled back, wiping at her eyes. "I have made your shirt wet. It will dry." She almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. "Come on," Owen said. "Let me cook tonight, you rest." Ruth did not argue. She sat at the table while Owen made a simple meal of beans and cornbread. It was not as good as anything she made, but she ate more than he had seen her eat in weeks. That night, the house felt different. The silence between them was no longer awkward but comfortable. When they said good night and retreated to their rooms, Owen felt something had shifted, some small crack in the wall between them. He did not hear her crying that night. The next day was Sunday, and they went to church together for the first time since their wedding. Ruth wore a dress of dark blue, the first color Owen had seen her wear. People greeted them with varying degrees of warmth. Some were genuinely kind. Others were clearly curious about the hasty marriage and the widow who had bought herself a husband. After the service, Mrs. Henderson invited them to Sunday dinner. Her house was warm and welcoming, full of the chaos of children and cooking smells. Ruth sat with the women and actually participated in conversation. Owen caught her eye across the room once, and she gave him a small smile that felt like a victory. On the ride home, Ruth was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet, thoughtful rather than withdrawn. "Mrs. Henderson mentioned that there is a dance in town next Saturday," she said as they approached the ranch. "She asked if we would be attending." "We do not have to if you do not want to," Owen said. "I think I would like to go." Owen glanced at her in surprise. "All right then, we will go." The week passed in much the same rhythm as before, but the weight had lifted somewhat. Ruth still had her quiet moments, her distant looks, but she also began to emerge. She talked more, asked questions about the ranch, offered opinions. Once, Owen even heard her humming while she worked in the garden. Saturday arrived and they dressed for the dance. Owen wore his father's suit again, brushed clean. Ruth appeared in a dress of deep green, the color bringing out something in her eyes. She had arranged her hair differently, softer around her face. "You look nice," Owen said and meant it. "Thank you," Ruth replied. "So do you." The dance was held in the town hall, a large room decorated with ribbons and lanterns. A fiddle band played in the corner and people milled about, talking and laughing. Owen was not much of a dancer, but he figured he could manage. They were greeted warmly by some, coolly by others. Owen was aware of the gossip their marriage had generated, but he found he did not care much. Let them talk. When the music started, Owen offered Ruth his hand. "May I have this dance?" She hesitated only a moment before taking it. "I should warn you, I am not very practiced." "That makes two of us." They moved awkwardly at first, both trying to remember the steps, both too aware of being watched, but gradually they found a rhythm. Owen was surprised by how natural it felt to have his hand on her waist, her hand in his. They did not speak, just moved together to the music. After that first dance, others came. Owen danced with Mrs. Henderson to be polite, and Ruth danced with Reverend Thomas, but they kept finding their way back to each other as the evening wore on. It was late when they finally left, the moon high and full overhead. Ruth leaned against Owen slightly as they rode home, tired but content. "Thank you," she said as they approached the ranch. "For what?" "For tonight. For giving me a reason to feel alive again." "You did that yourself," Owen said. "I just provided the excuse." Inside the house, they lingered in the main room, neither quite ready to retreat to their separate corners. "Would you like some coffee?" Ruth asked. "That would be nice." She made coffee and they sat at the kitchen table, talking quietly about the dance, about the people they had seen, about nothing and everything. It was the most they had talked since they met, and Owen found himself not wanting it to end. Finally, near midnight, Ruth yawned. "I should sleep." "Yes, me too." They both stood, but neither moved toward the hallway. They stood there in the lamplight, looking at each other, and Owen felt something pass between them, something unnamed but significant. "Good night, Owen," Ruth said. It was the first time she had used his given name. "Good night, Ruth." She turned toward the hallway, then stopped. She stood there for a long moment, her back to him, and Owen could see her shoulders rise and fall with a deep breath. Then she turned back. "Owen." "Yes. Would you mind if I sang something? It has been a long time, and tonight has made me feel like perhaps I could again." "Of course. I would like that." Ruth took another breath, then began to sing. Her voice was soft at first, tentative, like something that had been stored away and was being carefully unwrapped. The song was one Owen did not recognize, something about a river and coming home. But as she sang, her voice grew stronger, clearer, and Owen felt something crack open in his chest. The voice that emerged was beautiful. Not trained or perfect, but honest and full of emotion. She sang with her eyes closed, lost in the music, and Owen watched her transform. The tight lines of grief around her mouth softened. Her face opened. For those few minutes, she was not the silent, sad widow. She was herself, fully and completely. When the song ended, she opened her eyes and found Owen staring at her. "That was beautiful," he said, his voice rough. "My mother taught me that song. I sang it at my wedding to James. I have not been able to since he died. But tonight I wanted to try. I am glad you did." Ruth moved closer to him, close enough that he could see the tears shining in her eyes. But these were different tears. "I think I have been holding my breath since James died," she said, "waiting to feel something other than grief. Tonight, singing that song, I felt something shift. I felt like maybe I could breathe again." "I know what you mean," Owen said. "I have been holding my breath too, in a way, since my father died, since the ranch started failing. Tonight felt different. They stood very close now, closer than they had been even while dancing." Owen reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. She did not pull away. "Ruth," he said softly, "I know we started this as an arrangement, but standing here now I find myself wanting something more. No pressure, no expectations, just honesty. I find myself caring about you more than I expected." Ruth's hand came up to rest on his chest, over his heart. "I feel it too. It frightens me. I did not think I could feel anything for anyone again, but you have been so patient, so kind. And tonight, watching you, dancing with you, I realized that maybe this could be more than an arrangement, if we let it." "Can I kiss you?" Owen asked. "Yes." He leaned down slowly, giving her every chance to change her mind, but she did not. Their lips met gently, tentatively, a question more than a statement. Ruth's hand fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, and the kiss deepened. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. Ruth rested her forehead against his chest, and Owen wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. "This does not mean I am not still grieving," Ruth said quietly. "I love James. That does not go away. I know. I am not asking you to stop grieving. I am just asking if there might be room for something new alongside the grief. I think there might be." They stood holding each other for a long time, swaying slightly as if still dancing to music only they could hear. Finally, reluctantly, they separated. "I should go to bed," Ruth said, but she did not move. "Do you want to?" Owen asked. She understood the real question. "Not really, but I think we should take this slowly. I need time. We have time." Ruth smiled then, a real smile, the first he had seen from her. It transformed her face, made her look younger, lighter. "Good night, Owen." "Good night, Ruth." This time when she walked down the hallway, it felt different. Not a retreat, but a pause, a space to breathe and think. Owen stood in the main room long after she had gone, touching his lips, still feeling the ghost of that kiss. He went to bed that night with something he had not felt in a long time: hope. The following weeks brought a change to the ranch that everyone could feel. Spring was settling into the high desert in earnest, bringing green to the hills and warmth to the days. Owen worked from dawn to dusk, planting fields, tending cattle, repairing winter damage, but now there was lightness to his work. He would catch himself whistling, something he had not done since before his father took sick. Ruth bloomed alongside the spring. Color returned to her cheeks. She smiled more, laughed sometimes at things Owen said. She spent hours in her garden, coaxing vegetables and flowers from the stubborn soil. In the evenings, they would sit together on the porch, watching the sun set over the Jemez Mountains, talking about their days, their pasts, their hopes. They learned each other slowly, carefully. Owen learned that Ruth had grown up in a small town in Missouri, the youngest of 4 daughters. Her mother had died when she was 16, and she had kept house for her father until she married James. She had wanted children, but had not gotten pregnant in the year she was married, something she spoke of with quiet sadness. Ruth learned that Owen had been a lonely child, raised by a stern but loving father who had never quite gotten over the loss of his wife. Owen had never been to school, but his father had taught him to read and write, to understand the land and the animals. He had never been more than 100 miles from Abiquiu in his life. "Would you want to travel?" Ruth asked one evening as they sat on the porch. "See other places?" Owen considered it. "Maybe someday, but this land is in my blood. I cannot imagine being anywhere else for long." "I understand that." James was the same way about his farm in Kansas. He could not imagine leaving it. But then he died, and suddenly the land felt like a prison rather than a home. And now, Ruth looked out at the ranch spread before them, at the fields beginning to show green, at the cattle grazing in the distance, at the mountains turning purple in the fading light. Now it is starting to feel like home again. A different home, but still home. Owen reached over and took her hand. She laced her fingers through his and squeezed. These small touches had become common between them. A brush of hands as they passed in the kitchen. His hand on her back as they walked together. Her fingers straightening his collar before church. Each touch a small declaration of something growing between them, but they still slept in separate rooms. Owen did not push, and Ruth did not offer. They were building something, but it needed time to strengthen, to become sure. In early May, trouble came in the form of a drought. The spring rains that usually blessed the high desert failed to materialize. The fields that had looked so promising began to brown. The creek that ran through the property dropped to a trickle. Owen watched the sky anxiously each day, hoping for clouds, but they remained stubbornly absent. "We may lose the crops," Owen said one evening, his worry evident. Ruth was quiet for a moment. "What can we do?" "Pray for rain, not much else." But Ruth was not satisfied with that answer. The next morning, she went into town and came back with several large canvas tarps and an idea she had heard from Mrs. Henderson. They could rig a system to catch and store what little water there was from the creek and from the rare morning dew. Owen was skeptical but willing to try anything. Together they worked to implement Ruth's plan, stretching tarps to catch and funnel water into barrels. It was back-breaking work in the growing heat, but Ruth never complained, working alongside Owen from dawn until the sun made it too hot to continue. "You are stronger than you look," Owen said one afternoon, watching her haul a bucket of water. "You are more persistent than I would have expected," Ruth replied, wiping sweat from her forehead. "Most men would have given up on those crops by now. Kellers do not quit, so I have noticed." They saved perhaps half the crops through sheer determination and Ruth's ingenuity. It was not the yield Owen had hoped for, but it was enough to get by, to have seed for next year, to keep moving forward. The shared struggle brought them even closer. Working side by side in the heat, united in purpose, they learned to move in sync, to anticipate each other's needs, to be a team. At night, exhausted, they would collapse on the porch with glasses of cool water from the root cellar and feel the satisfaction of having fought together against the land's harshness. One particularly hot evening in late May, after a long day of work, Ruth turned to Owen. "I want to show you something." She led him around to the back of the house where her garden struggled against the drought. In one corner, somehow, impossibly, a rose bush had bloomed. 3 perfect red roses stood out against the dry brown landscape like a small miracle. "How did you manage this?" Owen asked. "I carried water to it every morning before you woke up. It was my mother's favorite flower. I brought a cutting with me from Kansas, not really thinking it would survive the journey, but it did. And now this." Owen looked at Ruth, at the fierce pride and joy on her face, and felt something in his chest expand. She had carried water every morning, sacrificing sleep, to nurture something beautiful in the midst of all the struggle. It was such a Ruth thing to do. "They are beautiful," he said, but he was not looking at the roses. Ruth turned to him and caught his gaze. Something passed between them, a silent communication that had become their own language. "Owen," she said softly, "I think I am ready." "Ready for what?" "To not have separate rooms anymore." His heart hammered in his chest. "Are you sure?" "I am sure that I do not want to keep living half a life. I am sure that when I see you, my heart feels lighter. I am sure that I think about you when you are not near. I am sure that when you kiss me goodnight at my door, I want to ask you to stay." She stepped closer to him. "I will always love James. That love is part of who I am. But I am learning that loving him does not mean I cannot also love you. And I do love you, Owen. Maybe I have for a while now." Owen felt like all the air had left his lungs. "I love you too. I have been afraid to say it, afraid it was too soon or that you would not want to hear it. But I love you, Ruth. You have brought life back to this place, back to me." He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, deep and passionate, pouring everything he felt into it. She kissed him back with equal fervor, her arms wrapping around his neck. When they finally pulled apart, both were flushed and breathing hard. "Take me to bed, Owen," Ruth said. He did not need to be asked twice. That night, their marriage became real in every sense. They came together with tenderness and passion, learning each other in this new way, taking their time. Ruth had been married before, but this felt different, she told him later. This felt like choosing rather than following a path laid out by others. Owen, for whom this was entirely new, tried to be gentle to make it good for her. Ruth guided him, patient and loving, and together they found their rhythm. Afterward they lay tangled in the sheets of what had been Owen's room but was now theirs, Ruth's head on his chest, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "No regrets?" Owen asked. "None," Ruth said. This is the best decision I ever made, marrying you. Even though it started as an arrangement. Especially because it started that way. We chose this, Ruth. Every day we choose it. That makes it more real than any marriage that started with pretty words and faded. Ruth propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "When did you become such a romantic?" "Since I fell in love with you, I suppose." She laughed, the sound light and happy, and kissed him again. They moved Owen's things into the smaller bedroom to use as storage and made the larger room fully theirs. That first night became many nights, and slowly the last walls between them crumbled. They became not just partners in work but partners in all things, united in purpose and in love. The drought finally broke in mid-June with a storm that rolled in from the mountains, bringing blessed rain that soaked the parched earth. Owen and Ruth stood on the porch, watching the rain fall, holding each other and laughing with relief. "Maybe things are turning around," Ruth said. "They already have," Owen replied. "The summer brought good things. The crops that had survived produced a decent harvest. The cattle fattened on the grass that sprang up after the rains. Owen hired the same 2 men from town to help with the heavy work, and the ranch began to look less like a struggling operation and more like a proper working farm. But the best thing the summer brought was the realization, in late July, that Ruth was pregnant. She told Owen one evening after dinner, her eyes bright with joy and fear. "Are you sure?" he asked. "As sure as I can be. I have missed my monthly time twice now, and I have been sick in the mornings." Owen pulled her into his arms, overwhelmed. "This is wonderful. Are you happy?" "I am terrified," Ruth admitted. "But yes, I am happy. I wanted this with James and it never happened. I had almost given up on becoming a mother. You will be a wonderful mother, and you will be a wonderful father." They stood holding each other, 2 people who had come together out of desperation and found something neither had expected. Love, yes, but more than that. A future. A family. The pregnancy progressed well. Ruth bloomed with it, growing rounder and more radiant as the summer turned to fall. Owen was protective to the point of being overbearing, trying to keep her from doing any heavy work, which she found both endearing and frustrating. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she told him one day when he tried to stop her from hanging laundry. "I know, but I worry." "Worry less, love me more. I can do both." She laughed and kissed him. "I know you can." The harvest that fall was good. Not the best Owen had ever seen, but solid enough to bring in some real money to pay the hired hands to buy supplies for winter to start building a small nest egg. Charles Merchant at the bank looked disappointed when Owen came in to deposit money rather than borrow it. In early October, Owen and Ruth went into town for supplies and found the general store full of news. There had been trouble with Apache raids further south. Tensions were high across the territory. Owen felt Ruth tense beside him as they listened to the talk. "Should we be worried?" she asked as they loaded supplies into the wagon. "We are far enough north that the Apache have never bothered us much," Owen said, "but I will keep a closer watch. Make sure the rifle is loaded and near." Ruth nodded, her hand instinctively going to her belly, which had now rounded noticeably. The Indian troubles stayed south, and life at the ranch continued peacefully. As winter approached, Owen made sure they were well stocked with food and firewood. This winter would be different from the last. This winter they would face together, with a full larder and money in reserve and a baby on the way, on Christmas Eve, as snow fell softly outside. Owen and Ruth sat by the fire, her feet in his lap as he rubbed them to ease the swelling. "This time last year I did not think I would survive to see another Christmas," Owen said. "This time last year I was so deep in grief I could barely breathe," Ruth replied. "And now look at us. Now we have everything." Ruth shifted, wincing slightly. "This baby is sitting right on my bladder. It is very uncomfortable." Owen laughed. "Just a few more months. Not soon enough." But despite her discomfort, Ruth was glowing with happiness. They had decorated the house with pine boughs and put candles in the windows. It felt like a real home, full of life and love and hope. The baby came in early March during a late winter storm. The labor was long and difficult. Owen rode through snow and wind to fetch Mrs. Henderson, who had experience with birthing, then paced the main room while Ruth labored in their bedroom, her cries tearing at him. After what seemed like forever, Owen heard a new sound. A baby's cry, thin and angry, the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. Mrs. Henderson emerged from the bedroom, tired but smiling. "You have a son. Both mother and baby are doing well." Owen rushed past her into the bedroom. Ruth lay exhausted in the bed, her hair damp with sweat, but in her arms was a small bundle. Owen approached slowly, almost afraid. "Come meet your son," Ruth said softly. Owen looked down at the tiny red face, the small, perfect fingers, and felt his heart break open completely. "He is so small," Owen whispered. "He is perfect," Ruth said. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names but never quite decided. Now, looking at his son, Owen thought of the two men who had brought him to this moment. "How about Thomas Owen?" Owen said. "Thomas after Reverend Thomas, who brought us together, and Owen after my father." Ruth smiled. "Thomas Owen Keller, it is a strong name. Hello, Thomas." The baby made a small sound, and both parents laughed through their tears. Mrs. Henderson stayed for a few days to help, but soon enough, it was just the three of them. Owen learned to change diapers and warm bottles of milk when Ruth was too exhausted to nurse. He learned to function on little sleep, to soothe a crying baby at 2 in the morning, to be terrified and amazed all at once by the tiny life they had created. Ruth recovered slowly from the birth, but she was happy in a way Owen had never seen. She would sit for hours just watching Thomas sleep, singing softly to him. Often, it was that same song she had sung on their wedding night, the one about the river and coming home. "You have come home," Owen told her one evening as he watched her sing to their son. "So have you," Ruth replied. Spring came again, the second spring of their marriage. Thomas grew stronger and more alert. The ranch thrived. Owen planted more fields, bought more cattle. The hired hands returned and the ranch began to need them full time. Owen was no longer fighting to survive but building something lasting. In May, on the anniversary of the day they consummated their marriage, Owen gave Ruth a gift. It was a small wooden music box he had ordered from Santa Fe, made of cedar and inlaid with turquoise. When opened, it played a simple melody. "It is beautiful," Ruth said, tears in her eyes. "You said once that you used to sing all the time before James died. You have started singing again, and it makes me happy. I wanted you to have something that reminds you to keep singing." Ruth set the music box down carefully and threw her arms around his neck. "I love you so much." "I love you too." Thomas, sitting on a blanket on the floor, made a happy gurgling sound and both parents laughed. That summer, Owen's hard work paid off in a big way. The harvest was the best in years. The cattle he sold brought top dollar. For the first time since his father died, Owen felt financially secure, able to breathe without worrying about the next disaster. "I was thinking," he said to Ruth one evening, "what would you say to hiring someone to help you in the house? Someone to help with the cleaning and the cooking, so you have more time for Thomas and for yourself." "Owen, that seems extravagant. We can afford it now, and you deserve help. You work as hard as I do." They hired a young woman from town named Maria, whose family had come from Mexico years ago. She was cheerful and hardworking, and she adored Thomas. With Maria's help, Ruth did have more time, which she spent tending her garden, which had grown significantly, playing with Thomas, and sometimes just sitting on the porch with Owen, enjoying the peace they had built. In August, Ruth realized she was pregnant again. This time the news came with less fear and more pure joy. "Thomas will have a brother or sister," she said. "Our family is growing," Owen replied, his hand on her still flat belly. "I never thought I would have this. A real family, a real home, a real love. After James died, I thought that part of my life was over. I am glad you were wrong. So am I." The second pregnancy was easier than the first. Ruth was not as sick, and she knew what to expect. Thomas was walking by the time his sister was born in April of 1880, a tiny thing with Ruth's dark hair and Owen's blue eyes. They named her Margaret Rose, Rose for the rose bush that Ruth still tended faithfully, Margaret after Owen's mother. With 2 children, the house was full of noise and life. Thomas was into everything, and baby Margaret had a set of lungs that could wake the dead. But Owen and Ruth thrived in the chaos. They had never been happier. The ranch continued to grow. Owen bought the adjacent property when the owner retired and moved back east. The Keller Ranch was now one of the larger operations in the area, respected and successful. But success never changed who they were. Owen still worked alongside his hired hands. Ruth still tended her garden and cooked meals, even with Maria's help. They stayed grounded, grateful for everything they had, never forgetting the darkness they had both emerged from. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Owen and Ruth left the children with Maria and went into Abiquiu for the dance, just as they had on that first Saturday after their marriage. So much had changed, yet some things remained the same. They danced together, moving easily now, their steps in sync after years of learning each other. When the music slowed, Owen pulled Ruth close, holding her as they swayed. "You remember the first time we danced here?" Owen asked. "I was so nervous, I barely knew you. I did not know if I could ever feel anything again. And now, Ruth looked up at him, her eyes soft with love. "Now I cannot imagine my life without you. You saved me, Owen. Not by marrying me or giving me a home, but by being patient, by giving me space to heal, by loving me even when I could not love myself. You saved me too. I was ready to give up. You gave me a reason to keep going." They kissed there in the middle of the dance floor, not caring who saw. On the ride home, Ruth leaned against Owen's shoulder, content and tired. "Do you think we will always be this happy? I think we will have hard times still. Life does not stop being life just because you are happy. But I think we can face anything together." "I think so too." They arrived home to find the children asleep and Maria nodding off in the chair. After sending Maria home with thanks, Owen and Ruth stood in their bedroom, looking at each other in the lamplight. "You remember our wedding night?" Ruth asked. "How strange and awkward everything was." "I remember you sang that song. I remember feeling like something had shifted, like maybe things might be all right. I was so scared that night, scared of you, of this marriage, of everything. I went to bed that night thinking I had made a terrible mistake." "What changed?" Ruth smiled. "You did. Slowly, carefully, you showed me that I had not made a mistake. That maybe, just maybe, I had made the best decision of my life." Owen pulled her close. "We both did." They made love that night with the easy familiarity of long practice, but also with the passion of people still very much in love. Afterward, Ruth sang that song from their wedding night, her voice soft in the darkness, and Owen held her and thought about how far they had come. The years continued to roll by, bringing more changes, more growth. Ruth became pregnant 2 more times, giving them another son, named Paul, and then another daughter, named Catherine. The house that had once seemed too big for one lonely man now rang with the sounds of 4 children. Owen built onto the house, adding rooms to accommodate the growing family. He built a proper bunkhouse for the hired hands, of which there were now 6 working full-time. The ranch was thriving, the envy of smaller operations, the equal of larger ones. But Owen never forgot where he had come from, never forgot that rope in the barn, never forgot how close he had come to losing everything. He hired men who needed work, was fair in his wages, helped neighbors when they struggled. Ruth was the same, always ready to help a family in need, to bring food to someone sick, to offer a kind word to someone grieving. "We were given grace when we needed it most," Ruth told Owen once when he asked why she spent so much time helping others. "How can we not pass that grace along?" In 1885, when Thomas was 7 and Margaret was 5, Owen and Ruth were sitting on the porch one evening, watching the children play in the yard under Maria's watchful eye. Ruth had just put baby Catherine down for a nap. "Do you ever think about that first day we met?" Ruth asked. "In the back room of the general store. Sometimes. You were so quiet and sad. I did not know if we would ever really talk to each other, let alone end up here. I remember thinking you looked tired, defeated almost. I thought we were both making a terrible mistake born of desperation." "It was a desperate move," Owen agreed. "But it turned out to be the best thing either of us ever did." Ruth reached over and took his hand. "On our wedding night, after I sang that song, I went to bed and cried myself to sleep. I cried for James, for the life I had lost, for the loveless marriage I thought I had entered. But I was wrong. I found more love with you than I knew existed." "That song changed everything," Owen said. "Hearing you sing, seeing you open up even that little bit, it gave me hope that we could be more than strangers sharing a house. It changed me too. Singing again after so long, it reminded me that I was still alive, still capable of feeling something other than grief." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the mountains, watching their children play, feeling the contentment of lives well lived. "We should throw a party," Ruth said suddenly. "What for? For us. For this life we built. Let's invite everyone, celebrate everything we have." Owen smiled. "All right, let's do it." They threw a party the following month, inviting neighbors from miles around, the people from town, everyone who had been part of their journey. The ranch was filled with people, with food, with music and dancing and laughter. Reverend Thomas, now older and grayer, stood to offer a toast. "7 years ago, I came to Owen with a proposal that seemed like a practical solution to two people's problems. I never imagined that it would become one of the greatest love stories I have witnessed. Owen and Ruth, you have shown us all what it means to choose love, to choose hope, even in the darkest times. May you have many more years of happiness together." Everyone raised their glasses, and Owen and Ruth looked at each other with tears in their eyes. Late in the evening, after most guests had gone home and the children were asleep, Ruth stood in the middle of the yard and began to sing. She sang that song from their wedding night, the one about the river and coming home, but her voice was stronger now, fuller, filled with joy rather than sorrow. Owen stood watching her, surrounded by the ranch they had saved together, the home they had built together, the family they had created together, and felt overwhelming gratitude for the chance meeting arranged by a reverend, for a widow who needed a home, for a song sung in the darkness that had brought light to both their lives. Ruth finished singing and looked at Owen, smiling. "Come dance with me. There is no music. We do not need music, we never really have." Owen walked to her and took her in his arms, and they danced under the stars, to a rhythm only they could hear. Two people who had found each other in desperation and built a love that would last a lifetime. The years that followed brought the usual mix of joy and sorrow that life always brings. Owen's hired foreman broke his leg and had to be replaced. Ruth's beloved rose bush finally died after a particularly harsh winter, though she carefully saved cuttings and eventually grew new bushes. Thomas started school in town. Margaret proved to have her mother's beautiful singing voice. Paul was a born rancher, more interested in the cattle than anything else. Catherine was the baby who stayed a baby longer than the others, clinging to her mother's skirts. In 1888, when Margaret was 8, she came home from school crying because another child had said mean things about how her mother had bought her father. Ruth held her daughter and explained, as simply as she could, the truth of how her parents' marriage had begun. "So it is true?" Margaret asked, tears still on her cheeks. "You paid Papa to marry you. It is more complicated than that," Ruth said. "Your father and I married for practical reasons, yes. He needed help saving the ranch and I needed a home. But Margaret, we fell in love. That is the most important part. We chose each other every single day, and we still do. The beginning does not matter as much as everything that came after. You love each other as much as other married people. I think we love each other more," Ruth said honestly. "Because we know what it is like to be alone, to be desperate, to be without love. We never take it for granted." Margaret seemed satisfied with this answer and went off to play, the matter resolved in the simple way children have. That evening, Ruth told Owen about the conversation. "Does it bother you that people still talk about how we got married?" she asked. "Not anymore. Let them talk. They cannot diminish what we have." "No," Ruth agreed. "They cannot." In 1890, tragedy struck when Reverend Thomas died peacefully in his sleep. The whole town mourned, but none more than Owen and Ruth, who owed their happiness to his intervention. They stood at his grave with their 4 children and thanked him silently for bringing them together. "Should we tell Thomas his namesake has passed?" Ruth asked Owen. "Yes. He is old enough to understand, and he should know the role Reverend Thomas played in our lives." They told all the children that evening the full story of how their parents met, how Reverend Thomas had brought them together, how their family existed because of his wisdom and kindness. So we should be grateful every day, Owen concluded, for the chances we are given, for the people who help us, for the love we find. The children absorbed this lesson in their own ways, but they all understood that their family was special, built on a foundation of second chances and chosen love. As the century drew to a close, Owen and Ruth found themselves in their 40s, their children growing, their ranch prosperous, their love as strong as ever. They would sit on the porch in the evenings as they had done for years and marvel at the life they had built. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we had never met?" Ruth asked one evening. "I try not to," Owen said. "I know what would have happened to me. I was ready to end it. And I would have drifted from place to place, never settling, never healing, never living. Instead, we found each other. Instead, we saved each other." In 1895, Thomas was 16 and talking about college, something no Keller had ever done. Owen was proud and a little terrified of his son leaving. Margaret, at 14, was courting, and Owen was even more terrified of that. Paul was 12 and could already work a full day alongside the hired hands. Catherine was 10 and showed signs of being the smartest of all of them, always with her nose in a book. "We did good," Ruth said, watching the children at dinner one evening, arguing and laughing and being a family. "We did," Owen agreed. That night in their bedroom, Ruth opened her old music box, the one Owen had given her years ago. The melody played, tinkling and sweet. "You remember giving me this?" she asked. "Of course. I wanted you to always remember to sing." "I never forgot. But I think I need to tell you something. That song I sang on our wedding night, the one that changed everything, do you know why I sang it? You said it made you feel alive again." "That is true, but there is more. I sang it because I was so scared, so lost, and singing was the only thing I knew to do that might make me feel like myself again. I was not singing for you. I was singing for me, trying to remember who I was underneath all the grief." "I know," Owen said. "I think I always knew. But in singing for yourself, you showed me who you really were. You showed me there was a person underneath the sadness, someone worth knowing, worth loving." Ruth's eyes filled with tears. "You were so patient with me, so kind. I did not deserve it." "Yes, you did. You deserved every kindness, every second chance. We both did." They held each other, two people in their 40s who still felt like newlyweds in many ways, still discovering each other, still falling in love. "Sing it for me now," Owen said. "That song, I want to hear it again." Ruth did not need to ask which song. She began to sing, her voice older now but still beautiful, still full of emotion. She sang about the river and coming home, and Owen closed his eyes and listened, remembering that first night, remembering every night since, grateful beyond words for the life they had built. When she finished, Owen opened his eyes to find Ruth watching him with a soft smile. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For singing, for staying, for loving me, for everything." "Thank you for giving me a reason to sing again," Ruth replied. The new century dawned, bringing with it changes and challenges. Thomas went off to college in the fall of 1900, the first Keller to do so. Margaret married a young rancher from the next town over in a beautiful ceremony at the ranch. Paul took over more responsibilities on the ranch, proving himself a worthy successor to his father. Catherine continued her studies, determined to be a teacher. Owen and Ruth, now in their 50s, found themselves adjusting to an emptying house. But they did not mourn the children growing up and leaving. They had raised them to be independent, to chase their dreams, to build their own lives. "We will have grandchildren before long," Ruth said. "The house will fill up again with noise and chaos." She was right. Margaret had a baby boy in 1902, and suddenly Owen and Ruth were grandparents. The first time Owen held his grandson, He thought about how close he had come to never experiencing this, never having a family at all. "What are you thinking?" Ruth asked, watching him cradle the baby. "That I am grateful. Every single day I am grateful." In 1905, they celebrated their 27th wedding anniversary. The children threw them a party at the ranch, a smaller affair than the big party years ago, but no less meaningful. Thomas came home from his law practice in Santa Fe. Margaret came with her husband and 2 children. Paul, who now ran the ranch alongside Owen, was there with his new wife. Catherine, teaching at the school in town, closed it for the day to attend. Standing in the middle of the celebration, surrounded by family and the life they had built, Owen pulled Ruth aside. "Let's go somewhere," he said. "Now, in the middle of the party. Just for a minute, please." Ruth followed him out of the house, across the yard to the barn. Owen led her inside to the very spot where, 27 years ago, he had stood staring at a rope, contemplating ending his life. "This is where it almost ended," he said quietly. "This is where I came the day before Reverend Thomas visited me. I was going to give up. I was going to let the darkness win." Ruth took his hand, understanding the significance of him bringing her here, of him sharing this. "But you did not," she said. "You chose to live." "I chose to accept help. I chose to take a chance on a desperate plan, and that choice brought me you, brought me everything." He turned to face her. "Ruth, I want you to know something. If I had known, that day in this barn, what my life would become because I chose to keep living, I would not have hesitated for a second. You, our children, this life we built, it is more than I ever dreamed was possible." Ruth reached up to cup his face. "I was dead inside when I came to Abiquiu. I was breathing, but I was not really alive. You brought me back to life, Owen. Your patience, your kindness, your love, it healed me in ways I did not think possible." They kissed, deeply and passionately, 2 people who had been married nearly 3 decades but still felt that spark, that connection. "Should we go back to the party?" Ruth asked. "In a minute. I want to stay here with you just a moment longer." They stood in the barn, holding each other, thinking about the journey that had brought them here, grateful for every hard step, every dark moment that had led to this light. When they returned to the party, no one questioned where they had been. The family was used to Owen and Ruth disappearing for moments alone together, stealing time to reconnect, to remember who they were beyond parents and ranchers and providers. As the sun set and the party wound down, the family gathered on the porch, the children and grandchildren filling every available space. Someone asked Ruth to sing, and after a moment's hesitation, she agreed. She stood in the middle of the porch, surrounded by the family that existed because she had been brave enough to accept a stranger's proposal, brave enough to believe in the possibility of new love. She sang that song, the one from her wedding night, the one about the river and coming home. Her voice was older now, not as strong as it once was, but filled with a lifetime of love and experience. As she sang, Owen watched her, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, and felt his heart swell with pride and love. This woman, who had come to him silent and sad, who had needed saving as much as he did, had become the center of his world, the reason for everything. When the song ended, there was a moment of perfect silence, and then everyone applauded. Ruth laughed, a little embarrassed by the attention, and sat down next to Owen. "I love you," Owen whispered. "I love you too," Ruth replied. The years continued their steady march. Owen retired from the daily work of the ranch, leaving it in Paul's capable hands, though he still walked the property every day, unable to fully let go. Ruth's hair turned completely gray, then white. Owen's back began to ache, his hands becoming gnarled with arthritis. But they still sat on the porch every evening, still held hands, still talked about everything and nothing. More grandchildren came, filling the house with noise whenever they visited. The ranch continued to prosper under Paul's management. Thomas became a successful lawyer. Margaret had 4 children and was happy in her marriage. Catherine married late to a professor and moved to Albuquerque but visited often. In 1910, Owen fell ill. It started as a cough that would not go away, then developed into something more serious. The doctor from town came and looked grave, talking about weak lungs and harsh winters and the limitations of age. Ruth refused to accept it. She nursed Owen with fierce determination, sitting up with him through long nights, forcing him to eat, to drink, to keep fighting. The children wanted to send for a specialist from Santa Fe, but Owen refused. "If it is my time, it is my time," he told them. "I have lived a full life, a good life. I have no regrets." But it was not his time, not yet. Slowly, painfully, Owen recovered. By spring, he was up and walking again, though more slowly than before, more carefully. "You scared me," Ruth told him once he was truly on the mend. "I scared myself. I was not ready to leave you. Good, because I am not ready to lose you." They sat on the porch that evening, the first warm evening of spring, and Owen held Ruth's hand and thanked God for another season, another chance to wake up next to her, another sunset to watch together. In 1915, they celebrated their 37th anniversary. They did not have a big party this time, just dinner with the children and grandchildren. But afterward, when everyone had gone home and they were alone, Owen pulled Ruth to her feet. "Dance with me," he said. "There is no music. There never was. We have always danced to our own music." They danced in the main room of the house, moving slowly, carefully, 2 people in their 60s who had danced together for decades, who knew each other's steps, who could move in perfect sync without trying. "You remember teaching me to dance?" Ruth asked. "That first dance in town when we were both so awkward. I remember everything. Every dance, every kiss, every moment. Me too." They stopped moving but kept holding each other, swaying slightly. "Ruth, when we got married, I was saving my ranch, but you saved my life. I want you to know that. You gave me a reason to live, to hope, to believe in tomorrow. You saved me too, Owen. You gave me a home, not just a house, but a real home. You gave me love when I thought I would never feel it again. You gave me a family. You gave me everything." They stood in the lamplight, 2 people who had started as strangers making a desperate arrangement and had become each other's whole world. "Sing for me," Owen said. "One more time, that song." Ruth did not ask which song. She knew. She would always know. She sang, her voice wavering with age but still clear, still beautiful. She sang about the river and coming home, and Owen closed his eyes and let the music wash over him. Let it carry him back to that first night, to every night since, to this moment that felt both like a beginning and an ending, like everything coming full circle. When she finished, Owen opened his eyes. "Thank you. For what? For singing, for staying, for choosing me every day for 37 years. It was easy," Ruth said simply. "You made it easy." They went to bed that night and lay together in the darkness, holding hands between their pillows as they always did. "You think we have many more years?" Ruth asked. "I do not know, but however many we have, I want to spend them all with you." "That is exactly what I want too." They drifted off to sleep, 2 people who had beaten the odds, who had found love in the most unlikely of circumstances, who had built a legacy that would outlast them both. The ranch thrived under Paul's management. The grandchildren grew and started having children of their own. The family tree that had nearly ended with Owen grew branches and more branches, spreading out into the future. Owen and Ruth lived to see their great-grandchildren, a blessing neither had expected. They celebrated their 40th anniversary, their 45th, their 50th. Each year felt like a gift, another rotation around the sun together. On their 50th anniversary in 1928, the family threw a massive celebration at the ranch. Relatives came from all over New Mexico and beyond. There were over 100 people gathered to celebrate Owen and Ruth's golden anniversary. 50 years of marriage that had started with a desperate arrangement and become a legendary love story. At the end of the evening, when the last guests had left and the house was quiet, Owen and Ruth stood together on the porch where they had spent so many evenings over the years. 50 years, Ruth said. Can you believe it? Some days, no. Some days it feels like we just met. Other days it feels like we have always been together. Ruth leaned against his shoulder. I wish James could have known this about me. It was the first time in years she had mentioned her first husband's name. Known what? Owen asked gently. That I was capable of such deep and lasting love, that I could build such a beautiful life. I loved James, but I was so young, so inexperienced. What we had was sweet but simple. What you and I built, Owen, it is profound, it is everything. He would be happy for you, Owen said. Happy that you found joy again, that you did not let grief destroy you. You made that possible. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars, feeling the weight and wonder of 50 years together. You remember our wedding night? Owen asked. How strange everything was, how uncertain. I remember being terrified, and then I sang and something shifted. I felt like maybe I could survive this, maybe it would be all right. It was more than all right. It was everything I never knew I needed. Owen turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. Ruth Keller, I would marry you again tomorrow if I could. I would choose you every time in every life. Tears slipped down Ruth's wrinkled cheeks. And I would choose you, always you. They kissed soft and sweet, a kiss that held 50 years of history of love, of choosing each other day after day. Will you sing for me? Owen asked. That song, Ruth smiled. You never tire of it, do you? Never. It is our song. It is where we began. So Ruth sang, her voice thin now with age but still true, still filled with emotion. She sang about the river and coming home, and Owen listened with his eyes closed, memorizing every note, every word, storing it away for whatever came next. When she finished, they stood together in the starlight, two people who had lived a lifetime together, who had built something beautiful from the ashes of their separate despairs. Come, Ruth said, taking his hand. Let us go to bed. I am tired. They walked into the house together, through the main room where they had spent countless evenings, down the hallway to their bedroom, the room that had been Owen's alone and had become theirs, the room where their children had been conceived, where they had held each other through sickness and health, joy and sorrow. They got ready for bed with the comfortable routine of 50 years together. Ruth brushed her long white hair. Owen carefully removed his boots. They climbed into bed and immediately reached for each other, lying together as they always did. I love you, Owen, Ruth whispered. I love you, Ruth, he replied. They fell asleep holding hands, two people who had found each other when they both needed saving, who had saved each other in all the ways that mattered, who had built a love that would be remembered long after they were gone. Owen passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 years later, at the age of 82. Ruth followed him exactly 6 months to the day after, as if she had been waiting just long enough to see things settled before joining him. Some said she died of a broken heart, unable to live without her husband. Others said she had simply decided it was time, that she had lived a full life and was ready to rest. They were buried side by side on the hill overlooking the ranch, next to Owen's father and mother. Their graves were marked with simple headstones that read Owen Keller, 1848-1930, beloved husband, father, grandfather Ruth Calloway Keller, 1854-1931, beloved wife, mother, Grandmother, she sang us all home. The ranch remained in the family for generations, passed down from Paul to his children to theirs. The story of Owen and Ruth became family legend, told to each new generation as a reminder that love can be found in the most unexpected places, that second chances are real, that choosing hope over despair can change everything. In the house on the ranch, now modernized but still recognizable as the home Owen and Ruth had shared, Ruth's music box was kept in a place of honor. Every anniversary of their wedding day, someone in the family would open it and let the melody play, remembering the love story that had begun with a practical arrangement, and a song sung in the darkness that brought light to two desperate souls. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind blew just right across the New Mexico desert, people said they could hear singing, a woman's voice carrying across the hills, singing about a river and coming home, a song that had changed everything, a song that had saved two lives and built a legacy that would last forever. The end.